in the marketplace. Parity in the marketplace. We must have a government, a federal government, a president in the White House who strongly believes this, and through his trade negotiations will open up the markets around the world, in the free world as well as the third world, open those markets up, and we will have parity in the marketplace for our American farmers. They are the most efficient producers of food and fiber in the world. They create more in our trade balances, favorable in our trade balances, than anything else that we have, whether it's in industry, automobiles, whatever. Our food and fibers provide that great difference in our trade balance, and this year they will set an all-time record. Now, Governor Reagan believes this, and he will do everything in his power to open those markets up in Europe, in Asia, in the third world, and determine that we, for our American farmers, for our Texas farmers, get parity in the marketplace.
That would be in the widest definition of the term, but it doesn't mean a guaranteed market as it has been generally understood.
No, it's not. It is not a guaranteed market.
So he would be against that.
And most of our American farmers are asking for parity in the marketplace because they understand that long term, that's the only parity that will really make the difference long term. You know, these guaranteed parities and these subsidies on a short-term basis, they fluctuate up and down. They're at the whim and the caprice, if you will, of the Congress then in session, and that really does not solve the problem. We have been doing that for the last many years. Really, for over 40 years now, we have been trying to evolve what would be a normal parity situation. The American farmers are saying that under no circumstances do we want a continued discrimination against us like this wheat embargo. What President Carter was doing there was asking our American farmers in a discriminatory sense to carry the burden of an embargo against Russia instead of going to industry, going to IBM, going to everybody else and saying, you too are going to participate in this embargo. So whether it is the American farmer movement, whether it's the Bureau, whatever it is, the American farmers are supporting the idea of parity in the marketplace and a strenuous effort through our executive department, through our agriculture department, through our State Department to open those markets up to the high productivity of the American farmer.
What if they have a bad year? If I were a farmer, a small farmer, I'd like the security of knowing that I'd have some guarantee. Would you answer that question?
Sure.
If you and
do you know that our farmers in America, and I have plenty of my ancestors who have been farmers in Texas, that they are the greatest entrepreneurs that work in our free enterprise system, and they are not asking for that kind of a guarantee. They understand that the risk that is inherent in farming is there, it's always been there, and it'll always be there. And they're willing to take their gamble, their risk, on the basis of their own efforts, their own expertise, their own productivity, and put it into the marketplace. But they want equity in the marketplace, and they haven't had it. We've had a series of negotiations with trade in various parts of the country and the world that have been discriminatory against our American farmers. What I want us to be able to do is to ship our wheat to Japan and compete against their wheat. I want our livestock people to be able to ship their steers and their cows and their bulls, their horses, their goats, their sheep to Japan or to Europe and compete on a basis that allows them to come here and compete with automobiles and cameras and everything else. That's what the farmers are saying, and it's no accident that yesterday up in Hereford, the farmers fully supported Governor Reagan and made a point of coming to me and saying, we are for your candidate, Mr. Reagan. We support him. This is that American agricultural movement. And the president of it made that statement to me yesterday in Hereford, Texas. And this is what he's talking about. He understands this. I understand it. Governor Connolly understands it. And I'm happy to have his support.
Sarah Lee TD.
Governor, you've preached economy in government, and you've tried very hard to cut the number of employees on the payroll.
I have.
But inflation's squeezing state agencies just like it's squeezing everyone. And a number of the agencies have adopted budget requests that are considerably higher than what they're getting now, 100% higher in the case of the Texas Youth Council. And your appointees, in many cases, have voted for these requests. And I wonder if you have any hope at all of holding the line on state spending, and also whether you have talked to any of your appointees to say, look, why are you going along with this?
Sarah, you need to separate two different things here. You know, I come out of the business world, and I fully understand the effects of increased cost and inflation and enhanced and improved and expanded programs, and that means more money. You have not ever heard me argue against that. To the contrary, you have heard me say that I know in some instances in our state bureaucracy and departments that we're going to have to expand those departments. We're going to have to enrich and enhance those programs. But on the other hand, what I have said is we can do it with fewer people. We can manage more effectively and efficiently. We can do a better job with fewer people, with less people. So these are not contradictory things. I have not talked in terms that we are going to be able to reduce the budget. You haven't heard me say that. I fully recognize that we will have increases in the budget. You know, Texas can't go from today at about 13.2 or 13 million people with an anticipation in the year 2000 of a 50% increase, 20 to 21, 22 million people in the year 2000 over the next 20-year period. You can't do that without increased costs. There's no way. We're going to need more schools, we're going to need more highways, we're going to need more water systems, we're going to need more of everything to take care of a 50% increase in our population in 20 years. But what I am saying is that the ratio of state people, state-employed people, the bureaucracy, that ratio can constantly come down per 10,000 population. And we can reduce the people even though we do have increased cost.
I think in most of in the cases of the large agencies I was talking about, Human Resources, Department of Corrections, they're talking about more people, a considerable number in some cases.
Their budget isn't improved either, is it? And I think that they will have a very difficult time with their budgets. So we are talking to them, and your second part of your question was, have I talked to my appointees in some instances? And I can assure you in some instances I have, and I will continue to do so.
Bill Davy, go ahead and call the station, please. Thank you, Bo, again. We've got those two out there that are not with us, except in spirit and telephone communications. Go ahead, Bill.
College Station, as you know, is located next to Bryan, and the Representative Bill Presnell represents that section. He's concerned about the maximum security prison and the penal system in Texas, and he sees that as an item that will loom large over the next legislature. Do you share his concern, Governor?
I do, and I think he's exactly right. We have our people on the prison board that are out searching now for multiple sites for prisons. We are at an all-time high in the state of Texas with respect to our inmates. The last number I had was slightly over 27,000 people in prison in Texas. And I do not look for this number to go down. I would repeat for you that in the year 2000, we are anticipating a 50% increase in the people of Texas. So if we have 27,000 today with 13 million people, how many are we going to have? What's that X number in the year 2000 when we have 20 million people or 22 million people? So yes, we're going to need more prisons, and the sooner we get about it, the better. And I have charged that prison board and the selection committee. I talked to T.L. Roach, who is the chairman of that committee in Amarillo yesterday. I've talked to two other of the members of that board today. and they will be meeting shortly. They are considering several sites, and let's not just consider one site or choose one site. Perhaps we should buy 2, maybe 3, and start building an additional prison, because we're going to need it.
Governor, we'll all agree that there's going to be more, continuing crime, and with just natural growth in population, probably more people being convicted. But there are also different approaches to how you handle a prison population. Your record as governor reflects a decrease in the number of recommended paroles that you receive from the parole board, but an increase in the number of rejections by you of that declining number of recommendations. The combination of fewer recommendations from the parole board and an increased rejection rate by your office inevitably means a higher prison population. I use that statement to say, as a question, won't the prison population depend in large measure on the attitude of whoever happens to be governor of Texas?
No, sir, I don't agree with that. I think that if you will go back with the numbers, starting with Governor Shivers, which I have done, and you relate those numbers of people actually granted parole, I'm talking about the absolute numbers now, as a function of the percent of the then population of the state of Texas and the then population of the prisons at that time, you'll find that there's not a great deal of difference. And that has not been a greatly fluctuating number. And I gave these reports to John Ford, my press secretary, your good friend, to hand out to the press. And I'm sure that you're working from the same information that I have.
Well, there have been at least two differences from time to time. One was during the administration of Preston Smith. There was a substantial decrease in the number of rejections of parole by Preston Smith. And your rate of rejection, I believe, is the highest rate of rejection of any governor since Alan Shivers.
Well,
at about 25 or 26%.
Bo, I don't think it's that high.
It was the last time I looked at it.
You know, it may be a small percentage higher, but these are just points on a curve, and you have to look at it over a long period of time, because those times and circumstances and applicants and the numbers that are approved, it changes, it fluctuates up and down. And I think that we're doing about the same as we've done before, and I don't have any real intention of changing that. It's a very complicated process. I get the recommendations, and then I either approve the recommendations or don't. I'm hopeful that as we go into this legislative session, the whole process of processing the applications for parole will be changed. I don't like the system that we have. I think that we can do better. I think that there are people in prison who should be approved and should be out on parole. I think there are a lot of people out on parole that ought to be back in prison. So let's don't kid ourselves about this.
Panel, let's give Jeff Thompson one more chance to rejoin us from Killeen. Jeff, go ahead, please.
Governor, the Texas prison system as a whole has been considered on a nationwide basis as one of the most self-supporting. With the increase in population, as you mentioned, possible selection of multiple sites, can the correctional system in the state continue that record?
Yes, sir. I think it can. And I certainly agree with your statement that nationwide, our Texas prison system is looked upon as the #1 system in the country. We have people from all over the United States. I'm talking about now prison authorities and state authorities from many, many other states in the United States coming to Texas, getting with Jim Estelle, who is in charge of our prison system as the professional, and seeing what we're doing. Because I do believe, and I commend what you say, I agree with what you say, that we do have the #1 prison system in the country. I think that can continue. I also think it can be better. I would add one further thing to you, that not only do we have these visitors looking at our prison system within the United States from other states, we have numerous visitors from overseas, foreign countries, who come to Texas to look at our prison system. It's a good one, and I'm proud of it.
Folks, I think we're going to have time for about one more round of questions. I may have to interrupt at any time in the middle of a question or a response, so keep that in mind. Sarah Lee, let's begin down there.
You mentioned, and I was interested, that our system of parole needs some work, and
It does.
they have tried to improve it by adding commissioners so that they could increase the number of cases that they reviewed. Do you think that there's need maybe for some solid criteria, or what changes would you suggest?
Well, Sarah, I'm not prepared tonight to put forward a program of recommendation that I'm going to make to the legislature. But I will make tonight a commitment to you that I will have a program. I will have suggested legislation. We are in the process now of evolving that. We are talking to various ones of the leadership in both the House and the Senate. We're getting their ideas, and we need to make some changes. I am not at all happy nor satisfied with the system that we have today.
Governor, I'd like to go back to a reference to an earlier question. That was about Bill Clayton's upcoming trial. I recall that a few months ago on this same program, you said that you felt that House Speaker Clayton should be considered innocent until proven guilty on a bribery charge. But at that same time, you said you stood by an earlier statement that Judge Nolan, the former president of North Texas State University, might very well go to jail because his area of misbehavior in the spending of state funds was very clear. A Denton County grand jury decided last week not to indict Mr. Nolan. In light of that decision, would you say now that Mr. Nolan is innocent until proven guilty by a
Absolutely.
jury of his peers?
No question about it. He's been through the process, and I accept what the jury turned. They said no, and I accept what they say.
Governor, one more question for the people of Dallas on the specific things that you think will come out of the legislature. Would you, for example, support legislation that would view a home not just as something to be bought and sold, but as a homestead, a dwelling, a shelter, and therefore entitled to a homestead exemption? In other words, the people of Dallas their homes are being appraised on their market value, willing buyer, willing seller. But one city councilman wants to see a home viewed as more than that, as more than a marketable item, more than just a product, as shelter, and as such, a fixed homestead exemption for every homeowner. Would you support something like that?
Roberta, I'm not sure that you know this, and I don't want to embarrass you in any way, but there is a homestead exemption now. Do you own a home in
Yes,
Dallas?
not in Dallas.
Well,
no.
I do, and I have a homestead exemption. And I have owned
But it would
several homes, and I've always had a homestead exemption. That's a part of our state law.
But I'm talking about at a rate beyond a certain figure in one's income. It would be tied to income, for example.
Oh, well, you didn't add that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. You're really talking in terms then of changing the homestead law that we now have today and increasing the allowance. Is that what
Yes.
you're asking me?
And it would be tied to income for...
Tied to income. I'm not sure that I would be in accord with that. I think that's a rather nebulous way to go about it. I think that an exemption could very well be increased, and I would have no objection to increasing
But
the
in dollar
homestead
value.
exemption. But in dollar value, and as it would relate to either the market value or just a set dollar value, so much. And I wouldn't even object to letting it track an inflation index. So I generally would support, helping on the Homestead Exemption Act, but I don't think I would agree to allowing it to be tied to income.
The point being, of course, that market value can sometimes increase faster than one's income.
I know, and income, I repeat to you, is somewhat of a nebulous number.
Bill Davy?
These exemptions are costing some school districts money, and although the legislature will be compensating in the future, what about farther on down the road as far as the lost revenue from tax relief?
I'm not sure that I understood that question. Would you mind repeating it?
Bill, please.
Okay, on the issue of tax relief
All
for
right.
school districts that are now having to up their own tax rates in order to make up for the money that has been lost through the legislative process as far as the tax relief amendment goes.
Primarily on agriculture exemption, productivity of agriculture land.
And elder.
As one, yes.
Okay, all right, fine.
What would you propose for the future? Just raising the tax rate along local jurisdiction lines, or will there be any more money coming from the state legislature?
All of the studies that we ran in making the analysis before the legislation was passed indicated in the broadest sense that these things would balance each other out, and that as we went to this centralized type of county-wide valuation and assessment, and as we gave the exemptions for the elderly and the homesteads and for the productivity relating to agriculture, that these would balance. I think that this is a part of this testing period, and until we go through this process and we get some of the hysteria out of it, some of the excitement out of it, some of the enthusiasm, if you will, both ways, both good and bad enthusiasm, pro and con, and really look at the facts and see what happens in a test instance like what we were talking about, Roberta, with you in Dallas. I don't think that I can make a judgment about then what adjustments should we make. I think that should be a part of the process of refinement.
Governor, panel, we have about 2 minutes remaining. Jeff, I would like to hear from you one more time, please.
Governor, any comments about the awarding of the state Medicaid contract concerning Bradford National and Mr. Burroughs Company?
No, not really. I have said on several occasions now that this is the business of Chairman Hilmer Moore and his board. I really don't know very much about it. It's a very complex type of contract, and it's a big contract. And it runs over a period, I think it is, of about 4 years. What I have strongly suggested, and I'm in exactly the same position that I have been before, and that is that that board should go to a qualified outside consultant and get their objective analysis of the two bids and make a judgment and a recommendation to the board, and the board should act on that. Mr. Moore feels that he was not well served by his staff, and he is saying, in effect, as I understand it, that he thinks that there could very well be about a $27 million mistake in the evaluation of the bids. And he feels that he has a responsibility to the taxpayers of this state to see that that kind of an error is not made. And I concur in that, but I want him to doggone sure be right about it, too.
Governor, panel, we are out of time. I'd like to thank Bo Byers from the Houston Chronicle, Berta Hammond from KERA in Dallas, Sarah Lee Teedy from the Dallas Times-Herald, and our two remote reporters, Bill Davey and Jeff Thomason, for being on tonight's program. And thank you for watching. We'd like to invite you to join us for the program in September, when you will once again be able to call in your questions for the governor. I'm Joel Fowler. Thank you and good night.
Join us next month with your telephone questions for the governor on Thursday, September 25th at 8 p.m. Central Time. Because of previous program commitments, some stations may carry the program by tape delay. So check your local listings for the Governor's Report.
Statewide distribution of the Governor's Report is made possible by grants from American Steel Building Company, Incorporated, Boring and Tunneling Company of America, Incorporated, and Perry Homes of Houston.
Hello, I'm Louis Luca. Some sort of discussion and some sort of a look.
18, KLRU, Austin.
Statewide distribution of the Governor's Report is made possible by grants from American Steel Building Company, Incorporated, Boring and Tunneling Company of America, Incorporated, and Perry Homes of Houston.
From the public television studios of KCOS-TV in El Paso, this is Governor's Report. Tonight's program is being presented in a special format in order to highlight some of the activities of the first international meeting of the border governors of the United States and Mexico in Ciudad Juarez today and tomorrow. Good evening. Tonight's Governor's Report includes a brief but important addition to our regular opening format. Governor Clements will speak briefly on today's opening activities of the first international meeting of the border governors of the United States and Mexico, being held in Juarez, Mexico. Following that report, Governor Clements will be questioned by our panel that tonight includes Susan Wright of public television station KUHT in Houston, who's on my left. Susan, nice to see you. And Carol Neeland of WFAA TV in Dallas. Carol, welcome. Later in the program, you and our television and radio audience will have an opportunity to call in your questions to Governor Clements. We will give you that collect call-in number a little bit later in the program. Our phones tonight will be answered by members of the KCOS TV staff. Governor Clements, welcome, sir, and I think you've had a fairly active day today in Juarez, and I'd like to have you give a brief report on that for our
Well, we really
audience.
have, and I'm delighted to be here in El Paso tonight. We have had what I call a historical meeting in Juarez. This is a first. Never before have we been able to have a meeting of 6 border state Mexican governors and the 4 U.S. border governors. So between the Mexican side and the U.S. side, we have a meeting taking place with 10 governors. And they're completely, of course, staffed by their own people. And they are presenting the kinds of programs and papers that represent what we consider to be areas of mutual interest, and then that in turn means mutual problems. We started out today with a very fine social lunch. There was no business transacted. And then we took up our meeting over at the conference hall in Juarez, which incidentally is a beautiful facility. And the position papers started in. We had position papers on tourism this afternoon, on the ecology, and on cultural exchanges. The way this is done, the format, is that the Mexican governor who is assigned that particular topic presents his paper, then the U.S. governor, his counterpart, presents his paper. So you have a Mexican view coming in on each of these topics, and then the U.S. view. Then tomorrow we will take up energy and commerce, the undocumented worker, and the desirability of a temporary work visa being issued to these undocumented workers that we now have. The Twin City concept will be discussed. Drugs and various related law and order issues will be discussed in the same format on Mexican side and U.S. side. And then lastly, and perhaps even more important, we will discuss how to continue this very desirable situation of having 10 border governors meet and discuss their mutual problems. How to continue this process, how to take these position papers and come up with then recommendations that would be made to Mexico City on the Mexican side and Washington on our side, and from those recommendations see then if we can't really evolve some answers to these very critical problems that we have had over a great many years. I'd like to emphasize one thing in this regard. I don't know of any governor that considers that this meeting is partisan in any sense or political in any sense. Whether you are a Republican, which is true in my case, or whether you're a Democrat, which is true in the cases of New Mexico and Arizona and California, these are problems that are recognizable. These are problems that are seeking solutions, and they are mutual problems. They're just as true on the Mexican side as they are on the U.S. side. And of course, this then lends itself to sitting down at the table and trying to arrive at some kind of reasonable recommendations that can solve these mutual problems.
Governor, this is the first international meeting of its kind. How do you see the frequency of such meetings in the future?
Well, that's one of the topics that I just finished talking about. This was brought up by Governor Gary as one of the co-chairmen, and Governor King from New Mexico at the close of our session this afternoon, as to how we should go about either establishing, the two terms were used, one was council and one was commission, whether or not there should indeed be a formalized council or commission established that would be the U.S.-Mexican Border Governor Commission or Council, that would be a continuing body that would establish task forces, cross-fertilized between the Mexican side and the U.S. side, that would address these issues, and then we would meet again and consider the conclusions and then make the recommendations. So I would expect that this will come out of tomorrow's meeting. I'm highly in favor of it personally. I think that Governor Gary is also in favor of it, and I know that Governor King is. So we'll see where we come out on it. And so far as frequency is concerned, I wouldn't guess. I don't know whether it'll be on the basis of we'll meet every 6 months, or whether we'll meet once a year, or we'll just be on call and meet as would seem to be desirable. I just don't know.
Governor, thanks very much for that report. I'm sure our astute reporters are going to have some further questions dealing with it. I'm sure they were. Just as for purposes of review for our viewing audience, in other newsworthy items across the state, Governor Clements was named this week to head the statewide Reagan for President campaign committee for Texas. Figures released this week indicate that state employment has decreased about 1,100 persons in a little over a year, considerably short of the governor's goal to cut some 8,000 state workers by the end of this fiscal year. An advisory committee on education appointed by the governor has adopted a report that calls for a return to the basic 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Governor Clements has pegged education as the #1 issue in the state of Texas. The year-old TENRAC, the Texas Energy and Natural Resources Advisory Council, chaired by Governor Clements, met recently to deal with such issues as the windfall profits tax, nuclear energy, and the general energy outlook for the state. And in Washington, the U.S. Senate has passed a $20 billion bill to spur production of 500,000 barrels of synthetic fuels each day by the year 1987. Panel, I'll turn it over to you. Susan, we'll begin with your questioning.
Yes, Governor, Ambassador at Large Kruger, Robert Kruger, who was not at the conference today, has said recently that you should leave the conduct of the United States and Mexicans' relations to the State Department or those who are empowered by the Constitution to conduct international affairs. He also made some reference to the fact that you had once said that you were not running for governor of Mexico, and asked you to remember that and leave the international questions essentially to the feds. That question has come up at this conference, and people are wondering, A, is anything really happening in those meetings? And B, if so, so what? Can governors really do anything when some of these questions, the bulk of them, really depend on nation-to-nation, Carter-to-Portillo contacts?
Well, you know, I think that President Lopez Portillo had some very interesting comments to make in Mexico City day before yesterday, which answered in part Ambassador Kruger. I think that the governors have a very important role to play in this. And certainly I have seen no sign of the other 9 governors at our conference listening to Ambassador Kruger and backing off of these issues.
Did Portillo address the Kruger remarks?
He addressed some aspects of the U.S. and Mexican relationship, which was well publicized, since he was talking to the executive editors and the publishers of some 20 institutions. So it got very wide coverage, and I'm sure you're more than familiar with it. And he was very critical of the deterioration of the U.S.-Mexican relationship over the past several years. Now, I think the governors can play a constructive role in this regard. I think that it's interesting that these 3 Democratic governors that are my associates on the U.S. side all seem to feel, as I do, that we have a constructive role to play. On the Mexican side, it works entirely differently. And President Lopez Portillo has been meeting regularly, often, with his governors, his border governors. And I can assure you that the position papers that are being presented and their enthusiasm and their constructive suggestions that will be made at this conference and meeting have all been processed by President Lopez Portillo and without any question represent his views. Otherwise, they would never surface.
Governor, you had originally said that Mexican President Lopez Portillo had promised you that he would be here at this conference, but he didn't show up. Do you think that lessens?
Let me correct something.
Okay.
President Lopez Portillo doesn't promise me anything. He is President of Mexico. All I have done with you and others is report to you that he declared I will be there. And I said, that's great. Now, when he has declared that he can't be here, that's great too. You know, he happens to be president of Mexico. So whatever his decision is in this regard, I accept. I would like to make a comment, though, with respect to this meeting that we're having in Juarez. If he wasn't totally in accord and in favor of this meeting taking place, there would be no meeting. So you can be sure that everything that's transpiring here from the 6 Mexican governors has been discussed with him. He has approved it. He's in accord with it. He favors it, and it'll happen.
You told me earlier today that you, in fact, at this point thought it was better that he was not here. Why do you think that?
Well, I think that that's a good statement, and I think that in his own judgment, and remember, I have not discussed this with him. It came as a surprise to me that he's not here, because he had said with no equivocation that he would be here when he agreed to form the meeting, because this meeting would never happen until he approved it. And so he transmitted and communicated to his governors, well, yes, let's have a meeting. So the meeting took place. Now, there's no one here of his stature. This is a meeting of governors. That's the way it was originally initiated. That was the format. And to have him here with the stature of his office, which is certainly, you know, above the governor's, I think that the meeting would have been more structured. It would have been more formal. I think that perhaps it would have been less constructive in the overall sense of getting things done, because I think that that he would have slowed that process down with his presence. He is the president of Mexico. We'll miss him, and we'll miss him because if for no other reason
Get away, didn't he?
Yeah, in case you
without his approval.
But at the same time, if you'd had him here, you would have had someone here who can do something about these issues, which are federal issues a lot.
No, that's not true. This is not a decision-making meeting. This is not possible, and I don't think that anyone that is participating, and I'm talking about the 10 governors, not all those people who are not participating, but I don't think any of the 10 governors here that there would be decisions per se coming out of this particular meeting. You have to remember that this is the first time in history that such a meeting has ever taken place, and there has to be a starting point. Well, the starting point is just meeting. And then between that and moving forward, deciding that we will establish a structure for continuity, that we will establish task forces to resolve some of these issues and not make decisions, Carol. I want to be sure we understand that. We're making recommendations because we as governors have the good sense to understand that we can't make decisions for our respective governments along the border. We can make recommendations, we cannot make decisions.
Susan?
Governor, I presume that one of the recommendations that you would like to have come out of these meetings, either now or at some early time in the future, is one favoring what you've propounded, the visiting worker program. In this discussion that you are going to have tomorrow on this, do you expect the question of a fair wage to come up in terms of setting a minimum standard for wages for these kinds of workers who would be here for limited periods of time?
No, I think that what will come out of it is a declaration that we do favor a fair wage. I would not expect tomorrow for that definition to be defined.
Can you define it?
No, I wouldn't presume to, because this is, again, a detail to a concept. The concept being a fair wage, an equitable wage, if you will, must be paid. Now, what is it? That's the business of 10 governors, not one. I'm one.
Do you expect that anybody would support the federal minimum wage? And would you agree to that if there was sympathy for that?
I'm not prepared to start telling you what I either agree to or I will recommend or what's going to be discussed. Why should I preempt a meeting that's going to take place tomorrow? So we're going to discuss this kind of a detail.
You've been propounding this for a long time now, and that's one of the nitty-gritty issues that goes with it.
Oh, yeah, and I've been asked this question now for about a year, and I've always given the same answer.
Do you think that you're going to get any kind of consensus? Do you believe that that would be one of the recommendations that you can get all of the governors agreed upon, or do you have opposition in your group?
You mean to a specific number?
No, to the program overall, the idea of having them come over for limited amounts of time, work at some fair wage.
You know, I want to make it clear to everybody concerned here. This is not a radical program. This is not a new program. It's not even an innovative program on my part. Europe has been doing exactly the same thing for years and years, and it's been working very successfully. And it's called the Visiting Worker Program, where workers from Yugoslavia today go to Germany, workers from Spain go to England, and workers from Italy go into Switzerland. And this is a very common practice. And they're issued temporary work visas. These are formalized visas. It makes the workers entirely legal as a visiting worker with a valid visa in hand. And they therefore then enjoy the benefits of being legal. It's the only humanitarian way to approach this problem. And in that process, they are paid a fair wage. Now, what is a fair wage? I'm not prepared to tell you, because that's a part of the discussion. That's when you start fleshing out the concept.
When do you think that would be settled among you then? When should we look for clarification?
It'll be settled in due course. I know you're impatient, but you know, I'm very patient.
Next year, 2 years, next week,
No.
next month?
I think that all of these details will be settled here in the next few months.
Next few months.
I would anticipate that.
In fact, the United States tried a program very similar to this, and it was called the Bracero program, and people have criticized your program.
I don't think it's similar. I don't think it's similar in any way, shape, or form. And certain people have done their very best to call this a Bracero program. It does not resemble a Bracero program at all. A Bracero program had people who were allocated and sent to a certain contractual work relationship with a specified employer. This program says exactly what it means when it says that they will have a work visa. They will be totally mobile. They can stay in Texas, they can go to Michigan, they can go to Illinois, they can go to California, they go wherever they want to. It has no resemblance to Bracero program. And when you try to tag this program with that, you are merely pandering to a certain element that wants to discredit the program. This is a work visa program.
What about the criticism, which was similar of the Bracero program, similar criticism of what will you do with the families of these people? What will you do about the children they bring over to go to school? Will they be able to go to Texas schools? What will you do about the medical services that they need? Will they be able to benefit
when they
from those
become
kinds
legal,
of things too?
when they become legal under this work visa arrangement, they are legal, and all that implies, they have equal protection under the law. They are deducted so far as their withholding taxes are concerned, and they pay their taxes. They will be issued a Social Security number. They are entitled to the municipal benefits, whatever they are.
Their children can attend
And
school?
if they have children with them, they will go to the schools. But statistics, and these are historical statistics, show that 80% of these workers come into the United States single. They stay 6 months, and then they go back to Mexico, and they repeat the pattern every other year through a 3-cycle or a 6-year cycle. 80%, and that's true in each one of those categories. They come single, 80%. They come every other year, 80%. They stay for only 6 months, 80%. So again, these problems that you're talking about, the areas of confrontation, they can they can be over-exaggerated, and we shouldn't over-exaggerate. Let's be objective about this program.
There's one more concern today that was voiced by Governor Babbitt, who is very critical of your idea in general, and that was,
well, I don't think he's all that critical. I don't agree with that.
Well, he was very critical today when I talked to him. And he said he just couldn't buy your program at all. And he said that one of his criticisms of it was that presumably you would have a certain number of visas that you would give out, and then all the people after that quota would simply come over the same way they're coming over now, illegally. Well, how do you, where do you, how do you...
It's interesting that he would discuss this with you. He's never discussed it with me. And as far as I know, he's never discussed it with Governor King, who is the chairman of the Border Commission. And I don't agree with that concept anyway. I think he's wrong about that.
What, would you have unlimited visas then?
I think that for any practical purpose, the visas would be tried to fit to the need and the locale where people are wanted. All you have to do is pick up the Houston papers and read the want ads and see how many people are wanted there.
Susan?
So then the program that you envision would limit the right of the workers who come in under the program in terms of where they go. In other words, if somebody was needed in Houston, he couldn't go to Dallas or San Francisco.
No, this would be a suggestion only. This person comes here and wants to work, and they would be entitled to know where is the job market, and they'd be told this. Now, if they choose not to go there, that's their business, because they're here for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to make money, and they send that money back to Mexico. Now, these people, whether it's Governor Babbitt or someone else, who say, I'd rather not do anything. I'd rather enjoy the status quo. I'd rather just have 3 million illegal aliens in Texas. Or Governor Brown in California say, I'm not interested in a program. I'm not interested in solving the problem. All I want to do is just keep the status quo and have 5 million illegal aliens in California. That's nonsense. That's absolute baloney. This is a serious, ongoing, historical problem, and it deserves our best efforts.
Why do you think the Carter administration has been so slow to get on your bandwagon then, if this is such an obvious and equitable and wonderful solution?
I wouldn't pin the donkey tail on the Carter administration with respect to this. This has been a problem for years. It's not a new problem. I've already said that. It's been a problem that's been ignored. I could ask you the same question. Why have not the 10 border state governors ever met before? We've had governors for how many years, but they've never met before. I think that's kind of silly, don't you?
Well, the point is that there is a crucial problem, as defined by just about everybody, where you have an illegal alien situation. you're saying that your program is going to solve it and it's the obvious thing to do. It would seem that a national administration then would just press forward on a good idea.
Well, maybe you better go to Washington and talk to them about it, why they don't do it. You know, I'm in Texas, and I'm going to do something about it. And Governor King, who happens to be chairman of the U.S. Border Commission of the 4 governors of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, he wants to do something about it.
What can you do if the Carter administration doesn't do something? What can you do?
I don't think Mr. Carter will be there too long. So maybe we'll have a new administration.
Susan, Carol, just one moment. You're doing your jobs very well, by the way. But I would like to give the audience an opportunity to jump in on this questioning. And the number to call, and you may call collect from anywhere in our viewing area, which is much of the state tonight, area 915-532-6013. Again, that number, area code 915-532-6013. You may call collect with any question for Governor Clements. Okay.
I had one more question I wanted to ask, which is
you may go right
that we
ahead.
just were on, which if you're advocating a program like this to treat people humanely and, you know, give them a decent chance at a good job and everything, I don't really see why you wouldn't commit to paying them a minimum wage, which is what we pay Americans to do, minimum wage jobs.
Well, the main reason that I won't commit to any number at this point is because it's not my place to. There are 3 other governors involved in this, and I am perfectly willing to sit down with them in a total spirit of reasonableness and discuss the issue and come to some kind of consensus. And why should I sit here tonight with the 3 of you who have nothing to do with this problem and preempt my discussions with my 3 governor associates? That'd be ridiculous.
But if these people are willing to come over here and take jobs that seem to need to be filled here, why would you not be advocating that they be paid what those jobs are worth, or paid the minimum wage?
Carol, we could keep talking about this till midnight, and I've already stated my position, and I am not going to state a number. I'm not going to make a recommendation until the governors as a group sit down and discuss this as one of the details of the program.
It's
the only reasonable and right thing to do. What's your next question?
You think they should be allowed to come over and
I'm not going to discuss it anymore.
Can we get to another issue perhaps from the conference itself, or maybe another newsworthy issue from the state?
All right.
Susan?
All right. Governor Babbitt delivered half of his address today in Spanish, and he was advocating bilingual education for everybody. He said that we should assume that people are not educated if they are not bilingual. You were wearing headphones for the translation like the rest of us, and I have 2 questions. 1, did you feel like you were not educated? And 2, do you advocate bilingualism for everybody, and if so, how would you achieve it in Texas?
I think that one of the recommendations that will come out of Dr. Willis Tate's Committee on Education that I have just now received will strongly support the bilingual program in Texas.
That is something that now serves Spanish-speaking children, right?
That's right.
Okay, I'm talking about bilingual for everybody.
Well, you didn't let me finish.
Okay.
And I also have a strong suspicion that there will be a thorough discussion with Dr. Tate next week when I meet with him to talk about his report on a mandated second language in the Texas public school system that will require Spanish to be taught through high school as a second language.
Require it all the way through high school?
That's right.
To be taught or learned? I mean, does that mean everybody has to learn it, or that the schools have to offer it?
You can teach it. I don't know whether they can learn it or not.
Well, there was a real question about that.
But nevertheless, there's a lot of discussion. And I can tell you that this will be discussed. Now, what the answer will be, I'm not going to tell you because I don't know. But it will be discussed on whether or not it should be mandatory to have Spanish taught as a second language, the second language, not the first. That doesn't, you see, the bilingual program that we have now that goes through the 3rd grade for Spanish, already #1 language from that point forward, but Spanish would be taught right on through as the second language. And I think that I'm not making a decision. I'm not going to tell you what my decision is going to be, but I am telling you that there are a lot of people that are recommending this, and I can see some real real advantages to this.
Carol, one quick question before we go to phones, yeah.
Would you push for that in the legislature?
Well, you're asking me for my decision now. I just got through saying I'm not going to make a decision. I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to listen to these people.
Governor, we're ready for the calls from our viewing audience. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Go ahead, man.
Go ahead.
Yes, I would like to know why that all of our people in El Paso that are on welfare and those in Houston wouldn't be offered these jobs instead of importing people in to do the jobs.
Okay, thank you for your question.
Well, I think that that's exactly what they should be doing. You know, they can read the want ads just exactly like everybody else, and there are want ads in all of these metropolitan papers asking for people to go to work. And that's one of the real issues that I think needs to be considered in our welfare programs, where anyone who is physically and mentally capable of working, they should be working. And I strongly advocate that.
Do you think these illegal aliens or undocumented workers are currently taking away jobs of Americans?
The evidence does not show that. To the contrary.
Ready for the next caller? Please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to know why we're so worried about the decent wage for the illegal aliens in this country when our own citizens, my sons and daughters, cannot get a job with a decent wage and a livable wage to pay their house payment and all the other expenses we incur as everyday citizens.
Thank you.
Living on the lowest.
Well, of course, what you're talking about is exactly one of the reasons that this has to be approached with prudence and good judgment. And a living wage and a minimum wage are not necessarily the same thing. And before, when we were discussing that, Carol was asking me in terms of would I agree right now that they should be paid a minimum wage. And I refused to agree to that. So they're going to have to be paid a fair wage. And what is a fair wage? That needs definition. And that's one of the things that the other governors should have full participation in.
Would like to remind our callers to make your questions as brief and to the point as possible so that we can accommodate as many calls as possible during our very limited time tonight. Also, we do not require your name at all, but we would like to know from where you're calling. So if you could include that with your question. Thanks very much. And we're ready for the next call. Please go ahead.
Yes, Governor, this is Mr. Burton from El Paso. And I have a question about your new train route between San Antonio, Houston, and Dallas. I'd like to know when it's going to be implemented and how much it's going to save the taxpayers.
I'd like to know the same thing. You're asking some very pertinent questions, and right now this train route to which you refer as being mine, I have never expressed an opinion about that train route. This was really brought up by one of the candidates who was defeated for the Railroad Commission. And this will be a major undertaking. And frankly, I think it's probably a dream. I question whether it'll ever happen.
Do you think it's a good idea?
I haven't even looked at it in that depth. And certainly whether or not it's a good idea would have to be related to the economics of it. And it's going to be terribly expensive.
Governor Clements is ready for the next question. Please go ahead.
Yes, Governor, last time you were in El Paso, you expressed opposition to the Cuban refugee situation. How do you feel about the Cubans being here in El Paso now?
Thank you.
How do I feel about what?
The Cuban refugee situation, the Cubans being in El Paso now.
Well, I don't know how many Cubans are in El Paso now that have come out of this last flood that we had through Florida. I do not have a report on that. I would question how many of those people who came in through Florida are in fact here in El Paso. When we first started out, I was told by President Carter, not directly, I want to make sure that we understand that. I read in the papers that President Carter said that there would probably be about 16,000 Cubans who would come in. The last count I had was that it was up to 127,000. Now, as long as we were talking about a small number like 16,000, and I want to define those as being political refugees, I had no problem with it. And as I discussed the numbers with the Cuban communities in Texas, and I'm talking now in terms of Houston, Dallas, in the Panhandle, and in the Valley. And I talked to all, and in San Antonio. And I did talk to representatives of the Cuban communities in all of those places. They thought, and they were in touch with the leadership in Florida, that we in Texas could assimilate probably 3,000 Cubans out of this 16,000 original number. I have no problem with that at all. And I thought that they would be processed in the proper way. As it turned out, they weren't processed properly. We were dumped on by Mr. Castro. There is no telling just who we did get in this process. I am convinced that we got some very undesirable characters out of Cuba. Undoubtedly, and it's already been proved, some of these people were released out of prison to come into the United States. So I don't consider them desirable. And I think they are going to represent a problem. I'm opposed to the policies as they evolve, and I don't think it's right for the United States, and I don't think it's right for Texas.
We are ready for the next caller. You're on the air. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Mr. Clemens, how do you think Governor Reagan would handle the visa situation as regards to illegal aliens?
As regards what?
To illegal aliens.
I have not discussed this with Governor Reagan, and I fully intend to. And until I do discuss it with him, I certainly wouldn't presume to tell you how, in a speculative sense, I think that he will react to the program that I'm putting forward. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't agree with it. I would be surprised if he didn't agree with it.
You're chairman of his campaign here in Texas. Does he not have some position on the undocumented worker problem?
Carol, insofar as I know, I don't think so. If he does, I don't know it, and I have never discussed it with him. But I can assure you that I will.
Does it worry you that he doesn't, if it being that as important an issue to you as it is?
No, it doesn't worry me because he probably has a position and I don't know it. So it's my ignorance I'm worried about, not his.
Governor, we are ready for the next caller. Please go ahead.
Hello, Governor.
Yeah.
You're on.
West Texas has been mentioned as a possible site for the MX missile, and I'd like to know how you feel about locating it here.
Thank you.
Well, I will meet with Governor King in New Mexico next week. I know it's week after next. And we will have a meeting with Mr. Perry, who is in charge of all research and development for the Department of Defense. And we will be discussing the survey, really, that was recently mandated by Congress to the Department of Defense to make on the split basing of the MX missile system. By split basing, I'm talking about the proposition of feasibility, where you split the system in half and put half of it in Utah and Nevada and put half of it in New Mexico and West Texas. This is really a means of developing the viability of an option. That's all it is. It's nothing more than that, and I wouldn't want anybody to think that it would be. I don't think it'll ever happen. I have discussed it with Senator Tower and some of the other senators on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and they don't think it'll ever happen. To sum up, I don't think that the MX missile system should be based in West Texas, and for the reasons that was not what it was designed for. And I want the MX missile system to be put in the silos in the mode of stuff the silos, S-T-U-F-F, stuff the silos. And that means that those missiles would be produced and would have their initial home in the existing silos where the Minuteman III missile is now based. The MX missile is 12 times as effective a missile as the Minuteman III, and it was designed for the purpose of stuffing the Minuteman silos. So that's what I believed when we had the concept of the missile, which happened under my administration in the Department of Defense, and I still believe that's where it should go.
A reminder to our viewers about the collect call number, area 915-532-6013, and you may call from anywhere within the viewing area. So please call in with your questions for Governor Clements. We are ready for the next caller. Please go ahead.
Is that me?
That's you.
All right. Listen, I want to ask you one question, but there's one thing I want to tell you, Governor, that I was raised in Houston and I went through school. In those days, you had to study a foreign language when you got into high school. There was Spanish, French, and Latin. Now, all of a sudden, in the last few years, they can go to college without a foreign language. We're sort of dumb. We only speak one language. I believe that you do wish you'd be taught Spanish. It's spoken in a lot of places in the world. Now, may I ask you, this is one question I want to ask you. I was just telling you about the foreign languages. You said that the people want to come in with visas. That means they're not braceros, are they?
They are not. I said that.
They will have better jobs. Now, I recently talked with someone who's in West Germany, and they got a small unemployment group over there. They get people from Czechoslovakia. They even had a lot from India. The people come in, just the men folks, and they work. So now they want to send them home because they want to put their own people to the few jobs. Now, if those people come in, they're not going to be braceros. They'll get a little bit better jobs. We've got so many, 8 million people out of work, Governor. Couldn't we get... I know that Houston has jobs and other cities.
Could we have your specific question, ma'am, please?
Yes, please. Won't they take jobs away from people that our people would want those jobs? They're not braceros.
No. You're thinking in terms of a level of jobs that these people historically don't take. You have to remember that these people essentially are in labor jobs. They are working in construction. They're working in agriculture. They're doing the lowest level jobs in industry. They're in service jobs, like in kitchens and in dining rooms and this sort of thing, in domestic service. And they do not do what you think they do with respect to the job market, and we have lots of statistics that prove this.
We are ready for the next call. Please go ahead.
Yes, Governor Clements, I'm a teacher in the El Paso Independent School District, and my question is this. If education is the #1 priority in Texas, do you anticipate advocating an immediate increase in teacher salaries to make them comparable to the rest of the nation?
Well, first of all, I want to quickly correct something that is misunderstood. The surveys that I have seen, and it's more than one, and they've been well published. They were recently published here in Texas by all the metropolitan papers, and it clearly shows that when you consider the cost of living index, and I'm talking about New York cost of living versus Dallas cost of living or El Paso cost of living, our teachers' salaries are right in the middle. They're neither high nor are they low. Now that's a part of the answer to your question. So our teachers are right at the national average, and I'm talking about within a matter of a percentage point or two of the national average. The other part of the question is, yes, I will recommend a salary increase for teachers, and it will be one of the first orders of business, hopefully, in the next meeting of the legislature. And I think the legislature is inclined to do this.
How much will you recommend?
Now, you know I'm not going to answer that, Carol. Why would I do anything like that? I have to get into the leadership with both the Senate and the House. I have to talk to their committees. I have to see what will be passable and what is not passable, what the budget looks like. And that isn't the kind of question to ask me. You know I'm not going to answer it.
Well, Governor, what about the university teacher salaries? Lieutenant Governor Hobby has recently called those a shameful situation. He says that university teachers have lost 30 to 35% of their purchasing power because of inflation. Does your inclination to recommend salary increases include the universities?
It certainly will be considered, and it will be part of my recommendation that there will be some kind of a catch-up salary increase recommended for our university professors. Exactly what that'll be and whether or not I agree with either the Hobby Committee's report and or the recommendation that came out of the coordinating board, these are different numbers, and we're going to have to massage those numbers and come up with common ground. But certainly I will recommend that kind of an increase.
You sound like you're averaging.
Well, it could be.
Carol, any other direction?
I'd still like to know how much, but...
Okay. We are ready for our next caller. Please go ahead.
Governor Clements, I'd like to know if we as Texas ranchers can look forward to any assistance from your office in overhauling the brucellosis eradication program so as to make it an effective and workable program, and if so, when?
Well, this has been an issue with me now for, well, however long I've been in office. Since I was sworn in, and about the next day I started talking about the brucellosis program in Texas. I've had some first-hand experience with this program in the past, and it was a terrible program and completely unsuccessful in my judgment. So I appointed a committee and got some outside help that was, I think, the best in the country. The Texas Animal Health Commission helped me in this regard. Mr. John Armstrong did an outstanding job, and as you know, he was the former president of the Texas Southwestern Cattlemen's Association. So we now have a revised program. It has been accepted by the Agricultural Committee in the Congress. It has been accepted on the national level through the livestock associations, and we're underway on a trial basis, and I want to emphasize that. We are now trying the new program that we have in Texas, and my stipulation was that they can use the funds, which I control as mandated by the legislature, for a year. And if this program does not show positive results within the year, then I'm going to withdraw the funds and we're going to take on a different direction. I have an opinion that the only way to really address this program is to require vaccination of all heifers, and then at that point the program is finished. In other words, positively identify the heifers, vaccinate all heifers, and then move forward. And that is the proper program. We're not quite there yet, but maybe we'll get there.
Thanks, Governor. We are ready for the next caller. Please go ahead with your question for the governor.
Yes, this is from the Houston area. For the last 125 years, the Texas habitual offender statute has automatically given a third felony offender a life sentence. Bill Rummel has served more than 7 years now for 3 check offenses totaling $200. The Supreme Court in March refused to interfere. Are you going to recommend that the legislature change this law in any way, since now Texas is the only place in the country where 3 petty offenses would bring an automatic life sentence?
You're exactly right. This needs to be looked into, and I have been discussing it with my general counsel, who is also the head of the Criminal Justice Division, Mr. David Dean. I have also had some discussions with Mr. Jim Castor, and they're coordinated, and we are looking hard at what might be recommended in this regard.
Our time may not allow for all of the questions to be answered tonight, but keep on trying, and we are ready for the next caller. Please go ahead.
Am I on now?
Yes, you are. Go ahead, please.
Governor, my name is... Governor?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I'm calling from... my name is William D. Chumley. I'm calling from San Antonio. My question is to you and Carol. I would like for Carol to read Mary Ann Means' article, a recent article in the Light, San Antonio paper, where she states that the bilingual requirements of teachers trying to teach the Spanish or English have some disturbing trends. Too often the teachers of Spanish-speaking origin are qualified in Spanish, but not really qualified in English. Students waste several years in school without becoming fluent in the language that will need to earn a living.
Could we have your specific questions, please?
Why do we have to have or spend this much money for a program that has not proved successful?
Thank you.
Well, in my judgment, the program has not been well administered. I agree with you that we do not have as many qualified teachers as we should have. That's a part of the administration that I'm talking about. And we need to give more attention to the operational execution of the program. I think a good many people through the Texas Education Agency and down through the 1,100 public school systems that we have in Texas and those that participate in the bilingual program, I think a good many of those institutions have just hoped that this program would go away, and they have been somewhat indifferent to it. And the program is not going to go away. The program is mandated by the legislature. It's here to stay. I think it's a good program. All of the educators that I talk to in the final analysis, while they find fault with the program, they still think it's a good program, and I concur with them. And I will be in favor of continuing bilingual education through the 3rd grade. But I do not want it to go beyond the 3rd grade, and it cannot and must not become a crutch. It must be stopped at that point and gears shifted and English become the priority #1 language.
I think we have time for about 2, possibly 3 more questions, and you're next. Go ahead, please.
Governor Clements, I believe in bilingual education for all people. I've seen it work in Europe. Does Mexico want to reciprocate by teaching English to their border people, as you have said that we will teach Spanish to our people here in Texas?
As a matter of fact, I think they're doing it. In the schools that I have visited, as I've paid visit to the 4 border governors in Mexico, I have been impressed with their English teaching in their public school system. And I can question the governors more specifically, but I have the very distinct impression that English is required in the Mexican schools, and it has become a second language with them. And what I had said a while ago is that I'm not at all sure that that will come out of the Education Committee and be a recommendation for the Texas public school system that we have Spanish required as a second language. Then if they want to take Latin or German or French as a 3rd language, that's possible. But Spanish would be the required second language.
Governor, our last caller is waiting with his question to you, his or her. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Governor Clements, I'd like to know, why are you...
Would you repeat that, please?
Governor Clements?
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to know, why are you against the establishment of a union for state employees?
Because I think it's improper. I don't think that our state employees should be in a posture of collective bargaining and the right to strike. And this is a very fundamental belief with me, and I think that when someone makes a decision to become a public employee, that they have then made a decision that they have a responsibility to the public, and that does not include the right to strike and collective bargaining.
Susan, Carol, it's back to you. We have about 3.5 minutes.
Governor, there are a lot of people around the coast that are very, very worried about the possibility of evacuation in the event of a hurricane, because the highways are very flood prone. And there is really very serious concern about this on the coast area. People being stranded, not being able to get past roads that are flooded. How has such a highway conscious state got itself into this kind of a fix, and what are you doing about it?
Well, the first answer is we're studying it, but that's not the whole answer. We're really doing something about it. And the most critical point was the bridge that couldn't be crossed because they had a low swag and got flooded in this last situation down there outside of Houston.
Well, that was just a heavy rain.
and that was just a heavy rain. But the Highway Department has jumped on this, and they are correcting that particular situation. And they are very conscious of the very thing that you're talking about. And we are moving forward with some definite plans to try to do something about it. We're improving some bridges. We're building some new bridges, all in the spirit of trying to alleviate this particular problem. It's not an easy problem to solve. Houston and that metropolitan area around Houston has grown so fast that in an evacuation situation where everybody wants to move at one time, the system just won't take it. And so we must do something about it. I don't want you to have any other impression, but it's not going to be a quick fix. There's no such thing.
Not this hurricane season?
No.
I just had one other quick question, too. Most of the subjects that have been discussed in public at this conference here in Juarez have been fairly non-controversial so far, tourism, cultural exchange, and that sort of thing. But when you start talking about the oil spill and undocumented workers, you're going to be meeting behind closed doors tomorrow. Why can't the media and representing the public be in those meetings?
Carol, I have no objection to it at all, but I'm not the chairman of this meeting, and I'm not even the co-chairman. I have told the Austin press, as you well know, that Governor King is the chairman. He represents the 4 U.S. governors. He has met with Governor Gary, who in turn represents the 6 Mexican governors, and this was their decision. I don't have any particular opinion about it. It's perfectly all right with me. You know how open I am with the press, and I'll discuss anything with you.
Governor, any procedures being worked out on the future oil spill problem? The problem with Ixtoc 1 apparently was that they didn't clean it up at the site because of some delays. So is there any work going on here toward actually developing those procedures quickly so that if there is another spill in that Gulf, that it can be responded to in a more timely fashion?
No. The issue is a good one, but there is no technology that will sop up, and that's the right term, sop, S-O-P, that amount of oil and keep it from accumulating in a slick and bring on a problem.
Well, apart from the technical debate about that, is there a procedure?
I'm going to have to interrupt. Thank you very much, Governor. Susan Wright, thank you very much. KUHT Houston and Carol Nealon, WFA-TV, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And thanks to the staff of KCOS in El Paso for providing the facilities tonight for Governor's Report, and to you, our viewers, for all of your telephone calls. If you didn't get a chance to do it tonight, it'll be on again next month, and try again. Thanks again. Good night.
Good.
State report is made possible by grants from American Steel Building Company, Incorporated, Boring and Tunneling Company of America, Incorporated, and Perry Homes of Houston.
I think I'll stick around for the every grade. There goes the old Admiral Byrd, bound for Brooklyn.
Statewide distribution of the governor's report is made possible by grants from American Steel Building Company, Incorporated, Boring and Tunneling Company of America, Incorporated, and Perry Homes of Houston.
Welcome to the Governor's Report, an award-winning look into state government and politics with Texas Governor Bill Clements. Tonight, you can call in your questions for the governor. Here's moderator Joel Fowler.
Good evening and welcome to the Governor's Report. This month in Texas, the State Board of Insurance turned down a request for a rate increase by the automobile insurance industry. The search is on for a new commissioner for the Texas Department of Human Resources. Texas stands to lose $8 million in federal highway funds because of the lack of compliance with the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. And in Houston, the Brylab trial continues. Welcome to tonight's program, Governor Clements.
I'm glad to be here.
Tonight, Susan Wright from public television station KUHT in Houston, Silvio Komatsu from public television station KERA in Dallas, and Roger Mulder from the Mulder News Service in Austin will question the governor. Also tonight, the governor will be answering questions from our statewide viewing and listening audience. Standing by to take your calls are volunteers from the Austin chapter of the League of Women Voters. I'll give you the number that you can call collect with your questions for Governor Clements a little bit later in tonight's program. Shall we begin the questioning with Susan Wright?
Okay. Governor, several months ago on this program, at the time you became the state campaign chairman for Governor Reagan, you said that your campaigning for him would not interfere with your state duties. And without going into a campaign speech, I wonder if you could address yourself to the recent criticism by State Controller Bob Bullock. He has been counting the days that you have been out of the state. They are 57 this year. He says you're a phantom governor.
Well, you know, it's interesting that he's keeping up with how long I'm out of the state and so forth. I don't think that there has ever been a governor of the state of Texas that has worked longer and harder and more strenuously than I've worked during the last 18 months. And when I'm out of the state, for the most part, I'm out of the state on state business. And, you know, I don't know anything in our Constitution that says that I clear my itinerary with the comptroller. So I suggest that he run his business and I'll run mine.
Well, of course, at some point or another, you might be running again. And so in the interests of at least satisfying others who might be influenced by Mr. Bullock, are you going to make any changes? Or
I don't think very many people are interested in Mr. Bullock. And if and when I make that decision to run again, I will talk about it at that time. I don't think it has any bearing on the issues that face us today.
Sylvia?
Governor, last week you said at a press conference that you were disgusted with Todd Shipyards, the Galveston company, for dragging out a state order to remove thousands of barrels of radioactive waste. According to the state health department, there are still around 11,000 barrels there. And you said at that time that you would talk with Dr. Robert Bernstein, who's the state commissioner of health, to determine what options the state has to see whether it can enforce Todd Shipyards to remove that waste. Have you talked with Dr. Bernstein yet? And if you have, what did he say?
I have. As a matter of fact, I saw him this morning. And we discussed low-level nuclear waste at some length in this TENRAC meeting. Mm-hmm. And I very briefly discussed this particular subject with him. I intend to have a very detailed discussion with him before long. I know that he is not pleased with the compliance and performance of Todd, just like I'm not. And I would anticipate that we will take some action.
What kind of action do you anticipate taking?
Well, we'll have to talk about it first. I'm not ready to discuss that tonight.
Do you know what options are available to you as a state government?
That's one of the things that Dr. Bernstein is looking into right now.
Roger?
Governor, I'm assuming that your announced plan of reducing the number of state employees by 8,000 between August of 1979 and August last month has been a complete and total failure. Is that true?
No, that's not true. I wouldn't exactly phrase it in those terms. We don't have the count for August, but we do have the count for July, through July. And we have a net reduction in the state employee bureaucracy of 1,300. Now, that's a long ways from my stated goal of 8,000. And I acknowledge that our program has not been as successful as I certainly would like for it to have been. But I'll also remind you that this is the first time since World War II that our state employees have not grown. So that in itself is a record. And not since World War II and before, and the records get very fuzzy back before then, has the state bureaucracy actually been reduced. So while we only have a net reduction in our employees of the state during the past 18 months, at the same time our population has increased significantly. So the ratio of state employees to per 10,000 population has dropped significantly. And we're making progress. And I'm proud of that progress, and we'll make more progress this next year.
At what point do you face reality and admit you can no longer plan to reduce the total number by 25,000 over the next 4 years?
Oh, no, wait a minute. That goal is still there, and we're working on it, and I think the goal is realistic, and we will address the remainder of that goal starting right now. So our goals are still as they were, and we're working hard at it. I met with the heads of the 12 largest state agencies today, and you can be sure that this was the #1 item on the agenda. So we understand each other, and we all have a common objective now. We're all working together now, and I would suggest to you that we'll make more progress in this coming year than we made in the last. We first had to get on a common wavelength where we understood each other and we were talking together. So we'll make more progress next year.
Susan Wright, you want to be in the next round of questions?
The Energy Advisory Committee that was meeting today has approved a report which would recommend or claim that by the year 2000, 15% of the energy use in Texas could be supplied by solar and wind power if these forms of energy were encouraged, and that would offset 400 million barrels per year of oil that are now consumed in Texas. Critics of the way things are and people who are advocating solar energy say that this type of energy won't get anywhere if people like the governor and other responsible people continue to talk about it as a very exotic form of energy. And so I'm wondering, is there any way that leadership can be encouraged to actually stimulate this form of energy, and if it's feasible, bring it online?
Well, Susan, first of all, I think that these people, quote, that you refer to, which are anonymous, I think that these people are on the wrong track. I don't know of anyone on this TNRAC organization, Texas Energy Natural Resources Commission. This is not an advisory group. I don't know of anyone that doesn't recognize that solar in the future will be a very important part of our energy source and will supply a significant amount of our energy. And I consider 15% significant. So that's a goal. 15% would be a goal between now and the year 2000. We can encourage certain forms of solar energy, particularly the passive forms. That would have to do with house construction and water heaters within houses, this sort of thing. When you start talking about generating electricity and getting into the more exotic, glamorous, significant forms of solar energy, we really are talking about research and development because we're not there yet. Now, what we in TNRAC agreed to do today, and we accepted the report, I would remind you that we encourage the report and we allocate certain research funds to these projects. And we believe in those projects. But we're also people who deal in the real world. And those members of TNRAC, including Lieutenant Governor Hobby, myself, the Railroad Commission, the Attorney General, so forth and so on, we believe that with a strenuous effort, which we will make, we might reach 15%. We might reach 15% by the year 2000. I'm far more optimistic about what we'll reach beyond 2000, because I think that solar will indeed be a significant source of energy in Texas beyond the year 2000. Between now and 2000, we're going to try hard to reach that 15%. And those people, wherever they are that you refer to, who don't believe that, they just aren't listening well. We're trying hard, and I think that we're the people who really can bring about the implementation of that program through academia, through some of the engineering and research and development projects that are underway, through architecture and building codes, through the construction industry, and we are dedicated to this. So I think that if they're listening tonight, they should be reassured.
I think some of these people are opponents of nuclear power. Some of them are people like the student who wrote into the University of Texas paper, I believe it was, that you had been booed on the UT campus, partially perhaps because of a stand of calling solar energy and wind power and these things exotic. They are
exotic, and they are, for the most part, in the research and development stage, and that's what I mean by exotic. They're glamorous, too. They're sexy, too. People like to talk about them.
Why are they sexy?
Because they appeal to people. People like to talk about them. You ask the question. It's a sexy question. So, you know, they don't like to talk about nuclear. Nuclear's here, and we do something with nuclear. We need more nuclear power plants in Texas. I've said this many times. We need to develop our lignite resources. Well, lignite's not very sexy, so people don't like to talk about lignite. But it is a very important part of our energy resources here in Texas. So you have in place the technology, the organizations, the ability, the people, the engineers who will move forward with lignite in Texas, who will move forward with oil and gas in Texas, who will move forward with nuclear power in Texas. And while we're doing that, at the same time, simultaneously, we'll be bringing forward passive solar projects and diligently working on the research and development of those more technical aspects of solar. So don't let anybody kid you about this. I happen to understand these facets of our energy problem. I've spent a lifetime at it. And I know the real world, and I know what's today, tomorrow, 5 years, and 20 years from now. And I'm not going to misrepresent this to the Texas public. I'm just not going to do that.
Sylvia?
Well, in another energy-related matter, State Senator Ron Clower's subcommittee on Consumer Affairs is now holding a series of meetings and public hearings on the Public Utility Commission to see whether or not it's doing its job of meeting citizens' energy needs. And the first one was held in Dallas last week, and several charges there were made against the PUC. One of the charges was that the Public Utilities Commission too often sides with the utilities when they ask for rate hikes, relying on information supplied by the utilities, and thus leaving it up to consumer groups to supply the bulk of the information that's challenging their rate hike. Because of that, several groups feel that to make it more representative, perhaps the PUC should have elected members rather than 3 members appointed by the governor. Would you support some sort of legislation, for example, calling for 6 members to be elected from single-member districts throughout the state?
The answer is no.
Why not?
Because I think that I can do a better job of making appointments to that commission like I did with Dr. Moke Rollins, for instance, an outstanding individual who's making a great contribution to it. And I would not be in favor of turning this over, so to speak, to an election process that would be subject to the fallacies of consumer thinking on one hand and not have a balanced situation. And we don't need 6 members. I think 3 members are plenty.
Do you feel that the PUC now is providing that balance?
I do. I think that the public, for the most part, loses sight of the fact that public utilities are exactly what they say they are. They are public utilities. And they are chartered and licensed by those municipalities. You live in Dallas. They have to go before the city commission in Dallas and justify those rates. And those rates are predicated on a reasonable payout of their investment cost. And they are tightly regulated right there in the local communities, which is as it should be.
one thing that both cities and consumer groups point out is that they do not have the resources available to challenge the utility groups.
Well,
and because of that, they don't have a well-paid staff, they don't have a number of lawyers, and they point out that that funding is supposed to be provided from the state, and that's according to the Federal Public Utility Regulatory Act and the State Public Utility Regulatory Act.
Well, I just don't agree with all that.
And they have never, ever been reimbursed.
You know, the last time you were on the panel, we got in a real discussion and an argument. I'm not here to argue or debate an issue with you. I'll answer the question, and the answer to the question was no. I would not be in favor of having 6 people elected to the Public Utilities Commission.
Roger Mulder.
Governor, there was a great deal of preaching to the choir today during the Energy Advisory Council meeting on the evils of the windfall profits tax. And Land Commissioner Bob Armstrong pointed out that Congress simply decided if it was going to pass deregulation, the only way it could pass deregulation is to have the windfall profits tax with it. Is deregulation worth the price?
Is deregulation what?
Worth the price of having the windfall profits tax?
Well, you know, deregulation in itself is a misnomer. We in Texas ended up with more regulation. And for the first time in our state's history, our intra-state gas is now under federal regulation with that deregulation bill. So, you know, as is usual, I think you have to look beyond the name. And in this instance, we didn't get deregulation. And we still don't have deregulation. And we in Texas got penalized in the process. That deregulation bill that you referred to was detrimental to the best interest of Texas. It really penalized Texas. So, no, I don't agree with that. And I think that certain consumer elements and certain states in the Northeast prevailed, and they discriminated against Texas. And I am absolutely opposed to that bill. And the windfall profits tax bill, as I have said so often, is not a profits tax bill at all. It's an excise tax. It's a tax at the wellhead. It has nothing whatsoever to do with profits. And we in Texas are terribly penalized by that bill. And I do not think that when we put into the record of TNRAC how we feel about that bill, that we're preaching to the choir. President Carter siphoned out of Texas with that priority bill of his $13 billion per year for the next 10 years. That's $2 billion a year more than our entire state budget, which is only $11 billion a year. And that is, again, just flagrant discrimination against Texas. So I'm opposed to that bill.
It was also pointed out that drilling activity in this state is apparently at an all-time high.
Again, that's a misrepresentation. You know, drilling in itself produces no oil or gas. And I can show you a family of curves that will prove to you that with the drilling that you're talking about, which is, as they said, at a high for the last 10 years, which is true, but at the same time, we're in a decline curve on our oil and gas. And during the decade of the 70s, our oil production dropped 705,000 barrels a day. And our gas production dropped 6 1/3 billion cubic feet a day. And I will predict to you that during the decade of the 80s, we'll have another decline of a similar proportion. So, you know, drilling in itself, that's a Carterite expression. You know, he's trying to cover up and misrepresent what's taking place out there. Drilling in itself will not produce more oil and gas. We've got to produce more energy. We've got to develop our lignite resources. We've got to build more nuclear plants. We've got to have more solar moving into the stream. And just saying more drilling rigs are operating is not even half an answer. It's not even a third of an answer. It's a tenth of an answer. That's just a part of the problem.
Where's the money coming from if the drilling activity is
Well, the money is coming from exploration programs where they get a charge-off on a tax basis of their income for these drilling programs. And this is a normal situation, and they are being encouraged not by the windfall profits tax, so-called, but they are being encouraged by the IRS. This is a regulation of IRS, that as they have income, they can, borrowing the phrase from the petroleum industry, they can drill up that income, whether it produces or whether it's dry.
One of the features of the governor's report are your phone calls, you and the listening and viewing audience. And the number to call tonight with your questions for Governor Bill Clements is area 512-474-5071. And you may call collect from anywhere in the viewing area. Number again, 512-474-5071. With your questions for Governor Bill Clements tonight. Panel, while we're waiting for the phone calls to come in, we'll have another brief period of questioning from you. Susan?
I'd like to get back to the phone company and the Public Utilities Commission. I think you've made your position perfectly clear on elected commissioners, but there are other complaints that are coming out of the proceedings. They are just starting in Houston, and I haven't heard any, but I have read, for example, a complaint from Jim Hightower, the president of the Texas Consumer Association. Southwestern Bell takes months to prepare its rate increase request, and he says that Einstein couldn't figure it out. And then his group and others like it are given 40 days to find all the tricks and giveaways that are tucked into the package. That's the end of the quote that was attributed to him. The thing I picked up on your answer to Sylvia had something to do with fallacies of consumer thinking. Is it possible that consumers and consumer groups never do have a constructive effect on a regulatory process? And if their thinking does or could enrich the process and help people get more for their money, wouldn't it be better to facilitate what they do rather than try to shut them out?
I don't think anyone has any intention of trying to shut out the consumer elements. What I was trying to convey is that the fallacy is that these are really local rate approval processes. And whether it's in Dallas or Houston or San Antonio or Fort Worth, those rate requests go before the city officials in whatever type of government that you have. If you have a city council, they go before the city council, like in Dallas. And they have utility engineers. I happen to know the utility engineer that served Dallas for well over 20 years. His name is Joe Nall. And no one professionally can ever say that Joe Nall is not an expert. He is an expert, and he is thoroughly reliable. He's a man of great experience. He is a professional. And the way we are set up in Texas is that locally, those bodies at the municipal county level are listening to these rate increases, and they either approve or disapprove. And so if they need to be staffed up, then Houston should staff up if you don't like the way that they're being heard. Or if they acknowledge, as you're saying, that their time increment is too short, they can extend it. Or if they don't have the staff necessary to properly analyze the rate increase, then they better get some new staff. You know, it's just that simple. I'm a strong, strong believer in pushing our government and these kinds of things that directly affect the consumer and the cost right back to the lowest possible level. And that's where it is with these rate increases, for instance, like the telephone company in Houston.
So you think that the consumer interest should just go to bed at night and trust their own city halls to do a good job
well, if they
representing
don't like it, they can elect some other councilman. You know, that's the way our system works. Or they can go to those hearings and have public hearings right there in Houston. And that's what they should be doing. And not only should they be doing it, I encourage them to do it. You know, that's the process that we have of government in the state of Texas. And if they want to be heard, that's the place to be heard, is right there.
Sylvia?
Governor, last week we had a utility expert, Jack Hopper, on our program.
You had a what?
We had utility expert Jack Hopper from Austin on our program, along with State Senator Ron Clower. And it was pointed out that a lower court...
Are you saying that Ron Clower is an expert on public utilities?
No, I'm saying we had utility expert Ron...
Oh, and then plus Ron Clower.
Ron Clower, who was one of the key people who helped establish the Public Utility Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And they pointed out that a lower court had made a decision that both cities and consumer groups would not be allowed to appeal rate decisions in state courts. The state Supreme Court is now looking at that decision. Now, if the state Supreme Court upholds that, would you be willing to fight along with some other legislators who want to make it very clear that indeed consumer groups in cities do have a right to appeal rate case decisions in the courts.
No, I would not. You're breaking down again the orderly process of the government system that we have set up in the state of Texas. And I suppose that that Jane Fonda would be in favor of the same sort of thing. And I'm not in favor of that. We have a structure.
What does Jane Fonda have
well,
to do
you know,
with
she's
this?
the same way on nuclear aspects. And there are certain set ways and systems set up in the state of Texas for an orderly process. And that orderly process is within your local communities. In your case, Dallas, just like I got through talking to Susan about Houston. And if the municipal authorities in Dallas are unhappy with the rates, they have recourse to the PUC, the Public Utility Commission. See? And that's the process you should go through. And your voice, if you, and I assume you are from the way you talk, you're a strong advocate for the consumer group, and you don't like your utility rate, then you should organize in whatever way you can in Dallas, go before the city council, and loudly, vigorously, and properly protest at that point, and try to make your point.
Would
you see?
Would you be willing to support certain things that would help that process? For example, in my last question...
Any way that I could strengthen that process, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, for example, the question of funding. It's provided for in the federal and the state Public Utility Regulatory Act that interveners be reimbursed for expert witnesses they bring in and for clerical work, and yet the state PUC has never done that. Do you think it should start doing that?
I don't know. I'd have to look at that. I never heard of that before.
Roger, could we have
it's an interesting thought.
A brief question from you before we get to our audience questions? Thank you.
Why are you so intent on pushing for the wiretap legislation and dealing with drug dealers when the local law enforcement officials can call in the DEA anytime they want to and get a wiretap?
They cannot. That, Roger, I'm sorry to say, is a misstatement. And I have talked to the federal authorities, and they will not share that information with either the local authorities and or our DPS, Department of Public Safety people. Now, that's why we need it. And until we join those other 23 states that have those laws, as they now do, and they're working fine, they won't share with us. When we have our law in place, which makes it then legal, you see, then they will share with us. And that's one of the really significant reasons that we need this law. But if we're serious, if we're truly serious in Texas in fighting this $3 billion per year drug traffic, then we must have this law on drug cases only for surveillance. And no authority that I've talked to has disagreed with that. And 80% of the people, 82% as a matter of fact, the people of Texas are strongly in favor of this.
What percent of the House is for that?
I don't know, but I think that they will be impressed with the 82% of the constituency out there is for it. And I'm doing my best to make this an issue in every legislative race. I want every prospective legislator, either as an incumbent or someone first running, I want them to declare to their constituency how they feel about surveillance and make that an issue in every campaign.
Governor, panel, we're ready with our first call from somewhere in the state of Texas tonight. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
I'm Beatrice Davis, and I live here in Austin. And I would like to ask the governor, where does he stand on the teacher pay raise?
I'm for it.
Okay.
Well, are we still talking?
Go right ahead.
It has been recommended by a committee of Lieutenant Governor Hobby and also through the Texas Education Agency that the increase this year be something between 10 and 11% for the next 2 years, in each of those years, giving a total increase of about 22%. I'm in favor of that. I agree with it.
Okay. Ready for the next call for Governor Clements. Go ahead, please.
Governor, I was wondering if you might, if it'd be possible, if you'd be more instrumental in removing those regulations and restrictions for the production of ethanol or gasohol in Texas.
This was a matter of considerable concern and discussion at today's meeting of TNRAC. And Commissioner Reagan Brown, the Department of Agriculture, was the chairman of the study group that rendered its report. And in that report that was adopted unanimously by TNRAC was suggested legislation that would remove these restrictions that you're talking about and would encourage gasohol by taking away the gasoline tax on gasohol and by going through other subsidies to encourage gasohol production over the next several years, and then it would phase back into it after, I'm talking about these subsidies, would phase out and the gas tax would phase back in after some, I believe it was 5 or 6 years. So we are strongly in favor of encouraging gasohol production in the state of Texas, and you will see legislation introduced, and I will predict to you that it will pass in the next legislative session.
Thanks for your call. When you do place your call and question for Governor Clements, we would appreciate having your name, but that's not terribly important, but we would very much like to know where you're calling from. Okay, we're ready for our next caller. Please go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. My name is Mike Fisher from Dallas, and I would be interested, Governor, if you could tell us whether or not the windfall profits tax will cause Texans to possibly pay a state income tax because of the flow of money out of the state by 1983, and if so, how much money will that be?
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I have to say to you that I do not think that it will cause that by 1983, and if I heard you correctly, that was the date that you used. Certainly it will hurt Texas. It will hurt Texas to the extent of $13 billion a year for 10 years. This will affect every person in Texas because you must remember that our present severance tax or excise tax, which this is, in a large measure supports our public school system and is our main tax in Texas. So this really impacts everybody in Texas, not just the big oil companies, as the administration would have you believe. But no, I have to say again to you that I do not think in that short term, by 1983, that this would in any way cause a state income tax, either personal or corporate.
Governor, the next caller is on the line. Please go ahead with your question.
Governor Clements?
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm calling from Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I would just like to say that I agree with the Governor's views on the windfall profits tax, and from the land of the Kiowa Indians, we take our head off to you. Governor, I'm on temporary duty here from Forney, Texas, a place I think you know pretty well.
Well, I certainly do.
Really, I'm not going to keep you, but I just want to ask this. Today, we're facing some of the greatest crisis that not only our state has ever seen, but also the United States of America as a whole. It's obvious that you're a two-fisted, hard-hitting businessman. And my question to you is this. Do you have aspirations to go on beyond the state of Texas to possibly national politics in the future?
No, sir, I do not. And I have had several discussions with Governor Reagan on this subject, and my answer and my position has remained absolutely the same, and it will remain that way. I don't have any intention whatsoever of going to Washington. I've been there. I am the elected governor of the state of Texas, and I have a responsibility to the people of Texas to do the job that they elected me to do. And if I were offered a job, which I have said please don't do, I would, without any question, any equivocation whatsoever, say no. So that's settled.
Ready for our next call. Please go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yes. Governor, is it not true that because of the increased oil and gas production resulting from President Carter's repeal of oil and gas price controls imposed during the Eisenhower administration, there has resulted a 50% increase in the oil and gas income to the state of Texas School Fund and Permanent University Fund, and a doubling of the royalty income of royalty owners resident in Texas?
Thank you.
First of all, you're right and you're wrong. First of all, the income is up. There's no question whatsoever about that. This is not caused by Mr. Carter. That's where you're wrong. This is caused by OPEC. This is caused by a group of Arabs who, representing their various countries, got together and formed a cartel called OPEC, and they have arbitrarily raised the prices of world oil, and under these circumstances, the income has increased. So you're right that the income has increased. Again, you're wrong that production has increased. Production has not increased. Production has, in fact, declined, both as it relates to oil and to gas. We are on a decline curve, as it is called in the industry. Now, the Texas position on all of this is that the so-called windfall profits tax bill that was passed and was the priority bill for Mr. Carter, the Texas position is that if there was indeed to be such a bill, that bill should have a plowback provision, and that all of those monies that were in excess of what would have been normal, that those monies would have to be plowed back into the production of energy of all types. And I'm talking about solar, I'm talking about geothermal, biomass, gasohol, lignite, coal, and oil and gas. Research and development would be included. And if it were not plowed back, 100%, now get this, it's tough, because this is the Texas position. If it were not plowed back, then it would be taxed 100%. Now, this is the way we increase our energy production in the United States. It's a tough program, but that's what we have to do.
We'd like to remind our viewers of the number that you may call, collect with your question for Governor Clements. It's area code 512-474-5071, and you're invited to call from anywhere in our viewing area. Okay, we are ready for the next call. Please go ahead.
Yes, this is R. Malcolm Johnson calling from Dallas, Texas. I have a question for Governor Clements on the energy. Why is alcohol not being manufactured in quantity for energy at the present time in Texas?
Well, there's several reasons, and I will make the answer as short as possible. First of all, we have had a set of laws that go back many, many years. I'm talking about as far back as 50 years, and then as it was said today in our meeting, some of them go back to the 1870s. And these laws constrict and are highly restrictive of the production of alcohol in Texas. And they relate all alcohol to drinking alcohol. And so we in the legislature this time, we're going to have to sort all that out and get some of those old laws off the books and let our farmers start producing the grains and the other materials that will produce that kind of alcohol, non-drinkable alcohol, but which will be entirely suitable for use as gasohol and help us to combat this energy problem. But we'll cure it. It's going to take place in the next legislative session.
Thanks. We are ready for the next viewer call. Please go ahead.
Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Good evening, Governor.
Good evening.
This is Steve Burton, also calling from Dallas. I'd like to say I agree with your stand on the windfall profits tax, and I admire your style in dealing with it. My question is very simple. Why isn't the solar industry allowed the same tax advantages for development as allowed the oil drilling industry?
There will be the provisions made on the recommendations of the Solar Committee that was submitted to TNRAC today. I want to explain TNRAC. That's the Texas Energy Natural Resources Commission. And we combined several pieces and segment of the Texas government and put it into TNRAC. Lieutenant Governor Hobby is my co-chairman. This committee is composed of the Attorney General, the Land Commissioner, Bob Armstrong, our Agricultural Commissioner, Reagan Brown, and so forth and so on. They are all of the top elected officials of the state of Texas. So when this report is submitted to us and we approve it, and in that process of approving it, it included the drafting of the legislation which will give the benefits that you're talking about for solar. We are strongly for solar. I don't know where this idea comes about that we have some kind of a thing in opposition to solar. That just is not true. We want to bring it forward just as quickly as we can, and we will give it the benefit of the kind of legislation that you're talking about.
Thank you. All ready for the next call? Please go ahead. You're on the air.
Governor Clements, my name is Hanif Edeen. I'm calling from Dallas, Texas. You may have to reflect a second or two before you answer, but I'm calling concerning the pardon and parole system. I wanted to know, especially from yourself tonight, sir, are there any conditions, or if there are, what conditions would you grant an inmate in the TDC, the Texas Department of Corrections, an immediate release from prison?
Thank you.
Well, there's only one way. Am I still, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Governor. I'm sure you're on.
It's just...
Go ahead.
There's only one way that that this could take place as far as I'm concerned, and that would be that it would have to come through the system, which has to do with the parole board and the commissioners, with a recommendation to me. And after it leaves those commissioners and the parole board, it's processed through my general counsel, who is David Dean, and his staff, and then it comes into me with the pluses and the minuses and the entire file. The whole file comes to me, and that includes the record of what he's done and his history within the prison, and based on that, then I make my decision. But it has to come through that process. I wouldn't, under any circumstances, consider it without that recommendation.
We very much appreciate your questions, and please continue to call in. We will accommodate as many as we possibly can within our program time tonight. And we are ready for the next caller. Please go ahead. Go ahead, please.
This is Robert Hicks from Franklin, Texas. In view of the fact that Texas is an oil-producing state and that Mexico is an oil-producing nation, and that the ambassador at large, Bob Kruger, is from Texas, why have your efforts to obtain cooperation among the governors of Mexico and the state of Texas met with little or no cooperation from the federal government, and with several negative aspects from the press?
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry, I don't agree with the negative aspects of the press. I think the press has very fairly reported those meetings with President Lopez Portillo and also the Mexican governors. They certainly fairly reported the governors' conference that was held in Juarez just last June. I think we're making great progress. We have concurrence of the concept. All of the governors are generally in accord. There is a recommendation on the way to the State Department being prepared by Governor King of New Mexico, who is the chairman of our Border Commission, and a similar counterpart recommendation being prepared by Governor de la Madrid from Baja California, going into the foreign ministry in Mexico City. And these two reports will say substantially the same thing. I think we're making fine progress. These things don't happen overnight. I would remind you that this is a problem that has been, for any practical purpose, ignored for the last 15 years or more. So we're making good progress, and I'm happy with the progress we're making.
Our panel will be returning with some additional questions a little bit later in the program, but right now we will continue to take calls from our viewers and listeners. And please go ahead, ready for the next call. Go ahead, please.
Governor Clements, I would like to ask you why you refused to debate the Democrats' State Controller Bob Bullock, the Land Commissioner Bob Armstrong, and the former Attorney General John Hill this week when you criticized President Carter for his refusing to debate with the Republican and former Republican candidates in this last debate.
Thank you.
Well, in the first instance, I think the first thing they ought to do is debate among themselves and determine their position. You know, you're talking about three very different birds here when you talk about Bob Armstrong and Mr. Bullock and Mr. Hill. You know, I think it would be a conglomeration that would make no sense at all. I think that the first thing they ought to do is have a debate among themselves and try to determine their position. And the second thing is that I don't want to debate a bunch of lieutenants. You know, if President Carter wants to come down here and debate, I'll be happy to debate him. Or if he wants to send Vice President Mondale down here, I'd look forward with great pleasure to debate either one of them. Or if they want to send Senator Kennedy down here. But I don't know why I should engage myself with Mr. Bullock and Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Hill. I don't know what their position is, and I'm not interested in this.
Thank you. Ready for the next question for Governor Clements? Please go ahead.
Hello, am I on the air?
Yes, you surely are.
Okay, my name is Emil Wood in Azle, Texas. I'd like to ask Governor Clements, to what effect does the so-called windfall profits tax affect small royalty owners throughout the state of Texas, and with especially to the extent of our senior citizens and the number of these people involved in this so-called windfall profits tax?
Thank you.
Well, to my knowledge, there are literally hundreds of thousands of Texans who are royalty owners, and this number can be substantiated. I forget right now how many royalty owners there are in Texas, but it is in the hundreds of thousands, so it affects a lot of people. And it is taken right off of the top. It has nothing whatsoever to do with profits. Whatever the income to those royalty owners was before this went into effect here a few months ago, it is now 70% approximately less than it was. And I can assure you there were some very, very surprised Texans when they opened their royalty check and they found out that it had been reduced by 70% from the month before. And, you know, to use a mild term, I can guarantee you they are irate, and they don't like it.
We are ready for the next call. Please go ahead.
Governor, this is Ray Porter, and I live in Lake Jackson, Texas. And I'd like to ask you a question, is why I'm retired on total and permanent disabled, and why my workman's compensation checks cannot be mailed directly to my bank account. In other words, they say I have to stay home to sign these checks because they're only good for 15 days. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I did not know that condition existed, and I can't really answer your question, but I promise you I will look into it, and I'll see what the answer is. I had no idea that was the case.
Pamela, can you shed any light on that particular issue at all at this point? Okay.
No, I've never heard of any regulation that requires a workman who is disabled to go someplace and rather than have his check deposited.
That's new to me.
Thank you. All right. Ready for the next question, please. Go right ahead.
Hello, Governor.
Yes, sir.
This is Bill Stacy from Kerrville, Texas, the Hill Country.
Yes, sir.
We're very proud of you up here. We think you're one of the best governors in Jim Hogg.
I can't remember that long.
Well, I can't either, but they say you was a good one. At any rate, we're in the process and about 30 days away from completing a passive solar house.
Good.
It's an earth-sheltered house where you push the dirt around it.
Yes, sir.
South-oriented. Now, what my question is, sir, is it possible in the future that the Texas legislature could give an ad valorem tax break to people who, like us, or who buy this type of house, so that a house that is heated by the sun, basically, will have a tax break?
Thank you.
Yes, sir, that is possible, and I am sure that is one of the methods of subsidy that will be considered in the legislature. I said a while ago that some of the recommendations had to do with architectural and construction requirements and standards that would give then a subsidy or a tax break, as you mentioned, back to that kind of construction. If you conform to those standards, you get a break. So this is what I meant by passive solar installations. They're possible now. And anything that we can do to encourage that, we should encourage it. It's just that simple.
Governor, panel, we are going to take about 2, possibly 3 more questions and then get back to you for sort of a wrap-up. We are ready for the next caller. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Governor Clements, this is Mrs. J.L. Telford of Austin. My husband and I think you're doing a great job, and we're back of you 100%. My question tonight is, what is the status of the initiative and referendum which you had worked toward before?
This is one of the priority pieces of legislation that will be sponsored, and I will back 100% when the legislature meets. I will put a priority on it. Now, again, my polls show and have shown now for well over a year that somewhere around 75 to 80% of the constituency in Texas, all Texans, support initiative and referendum. And I hope that it's going to pass. But I want to say to you that it's not going to be easy. There's no question about it. The people of Texas want it, but the legislature does not want it. There's no doubt about it. They don't want it. So it's going to have a tough time in the legislature. And while a moment ago, a few minutes ago, we talked about surveillance, I'll predict to you that surveillance will pass in the legislature. I think that initiative and referendum is 50-50. It's iffy right now, but we're going to fight for it and see where we come out.
Governor, you have one final caller, and please go ahead.
This is Dewey Hutcherson, Governor Clemens, and I would like to ask you a question. I am an industrial arts teacher at King, Texas, and throughout Texas I notice we have a shortage of industrial arts teachers. I was wondering what proposals or plans you have to encourage and promote industrial arts teachers in the state of Texas to stay in the field.
Well, I have to admit that as of this moment, I have no plan specific to reply to you in the way of an encouragement to hold these people or to encourage more industrial arts majors in our universities and as career development. This is a great program, and I have visited several of these schools across the state of Texas, and I am highly in favor of them. They're doing a beautiful job. Now, maybe we can come out with a program, I'm not sure what it would be, that would be a matter of encouragement, because I think it's a great program and it's something that we should enhance, enrich, and expand here in the state of Texas. No question about it.
Panel, we are going to return to you for questions as long as the rest of our time allows. Susan?
Governor, the state's Sierra Club has asked that there be a moratorium on site selection for new waste treatment facilities in Texas. And at the same time, near Houston, there is a procedure going on where a Gulf Coast Regional Waste Authority, this is a governmental entity, would like to construct a plant to process by a Stablex method toxic wastes, and they say turn them into a harmless, hard substance. I'd like to know, first of all, how you feel on the idea of a moratorium for locating new sites in this state, and then what is your reaction to this Stablex process or the Stablex plant being operated in competition with private waste treatment facilities and opportunities by a governmental or quasi-governmental agency?
I have heard very briefly about this method to which you refer. So from a technical standpoint, although I'm a technical person, I can't really comment on it. I need to know more about it, and I don't have those kind of details where I can make the sort of comment I'd be comfortable with. I'd rather answer the question more generally, and I think that your question really relates more generally to whether I would declare a moratorium. I will not. We need more waste sites, and again, that was one of the reports that we had today in our Texas Energy Natural Resources Commission TNRAC meeting. And this had to do with low-level nuclear waste, which essentially involves the same question that you're referring to. I think you would agree with that.
Yes. It's,
so we are thinking seriously, and we will undoubtedly propose to the legislature in this coming session that we have a state-owned and state-operated low-level nuclear waste facility. I think that's the right way to go about it. There has been considerable discussion between Speaker Clayton and Lieutenant Governor Hobby and myself and leadership in both the House and the Senate. We've given it considerable study with our technical staffs, and I think that's the route we'll go. Now, I can't comment, again, I repeat, I can't comment specifically about this method that you're talking about.
The comment by the competitors was that here is a governmental entity competing with us. We would like to be waste treatment facilities, yet they have this method and they're in competition with private enterprise, but they're
Normally, of course, I'm opposed to that. It takes a very special circumstance for me to move out of the private sector into more government. You know, essentially, I'm opposed to it.
Governor, as you know, the national housing crisis is also affecting Texas, and this month the state opened a state housing finance corporation.
Yes.
Could you explain how that works and whether or not you'll make it a high priority?
Well, first of all, it hadn't worked yet. You know, we're still in the formation stage, and this is being done through the Texas Department of Community Affairs, TDCA. There is a board appointed. They have hired a law firm. They have hired an investment banking firm. They have hired a mortgage firm to handle the mortgages. And they have the authority to go to the market and sell $150 million worth of bonds. And then they can come back and put that money to work in these single-family housing development projects for the low-income or medium-income families. We're on the way, but they haven't done one house yet, and there has not been one bond sold yet.
When do you expect that to happen?
But we're on the way.
Roger, we have about a little less than a minute. Can it be a quick question and a quick answer?
Sure. How much did you have to pay all those people to call in and say all those nice things about you?
Oh, that took a tremendous effort, Roger. But I appreciate it. I'm very grateful.
Governor, panel, we are
We're not supposed to do that, you know.
We'd like to thank Susan Wright from KUHT in Houston, Silvio Komatsu from KERE in Dallas, and Roger Mulder from the Roger Mulder News Service in Austin for being with us tonight on Governor's Report. And thanks to all of you who phoned in questions for Governor Clements. We hope you'll be with us again next month